Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Ayelet Tsabari is with me tonight. She is an author, and she's written a really interesting book called Songs for the Brokenhearted. It is about a young Israeli woman who learns of her mother's secret romance in a dramatic journey through lost family stories, revealing the unbreakable bond between a mother and a daughter in the debut novel of an award-winning literary voice. Sounds fantastic. Ayala, welcome to
Thank
the
you.
show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So, what is Songs for the Brokenhearted all about?
Um, I joked that I wanted to write the big, the great Jewish Yemeni novel. So it's about my community. It's about Yemeni um, Jewish women, more specifically. It's about, the voices and voicelessness, I'd say. It's about singing and how it brings us together and how it's a way for a generation of women who were illiterate to express themselves. Um, yeah, and many, many other things, I guess.
So, tell me a little bit of background so everyone understands. This is set in 1950 when thousands of Yemenin Jews were immigrating to Israel. Is that correct?
That's right. So it actually has dual timeline. It's partially in the 1950s, that's right, when the largest immigration of Yemeni Jews arrived in Israel. There have been others before that, obviously, like my family came before that. And then also in 95, which is during the time of the Oslo peace talks and the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. So these are the two timelines. One is more the mom's story, and the other is more the daughter story.
So, tell me a little bit of the mother's story. Where did she come from, and how did she get where she was going?
So my just like my family, the Saida, the mother character, came from Haidan, which is in North Yemen, and the
And where
Yemeni
where
Jews.
is Yemen?
Oh, okay. So Yemen is now I'm all like stumped. Yemen is just near Oman and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is south of Saudi Arabia and west of Oman in the Middle East. And it's on the Red Sea,
And at the time,
on its left,
there
right?
were numerous Jews there, correct?
Yeah, there was a thriving Jewish community in Yemen. There were hardly any other minorities there. It was just a majority of the Muslim population and a pretty large minority of Yemeni Jews they're claimed to be dated to the days of King Solomon. Um, yeah, and when they started arriving, they started coming in the 1800s, like 1881 was the first immigration of Jews. So they were devout, very religious, and always dreamt of return. As you know, there's Shabazi, a famous Jewish Yemeni poet. His songs are 400 years old, and they're all about return to Zion and dreaming of Zion. So on one hand, they were very much rooted in their community, and on the other hand, they always dreamt of coming back to the Holy Land. So as soon as the Suez Canal opened in 1800s, late 1800s, and it made it easier to travel. They started coming in like small quantities at first, and then larger later when Israel was founded.
And most occurred after Israel was founded after World War II. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that was the largest. Like my family came by foot. You know what I mean? Like they walked the desert, and then they took a boat from Port Said in Egypt to Haifa in then mandatory Palestine. And my great grandmother actually came in 1907 in Ottoman time. So,
And this really, from what I understand, I guess, was sort of I don't know what you call it, but a return to homeland from
yeah,
thousands of years earlier. Is that correct?
in their minds, absolutely. It was very much a part of their lives. Yeah, very devout and very insular. There was no like, there was no really connection to the world at the time in Yemen. The way that, learning about how my family, my grandparents lived, there were no cars. They took like a donkey to the nearest city. Um, there was no, even within Yemen, the communities were very insular, right? So for them to make it to Aden, to the south of Yemen, took months of traveling on donkeys. Um, yeah, all to make it to their idea of a promised land.
So if they
Um,
might finally made it to their idea of the promised land, why is it a song for the brokenhearted?
aha. So they actually believed that it was. It sounds funny saying it now, but they did believe that the streets were paved with gold. They believed an idea of a promised land that is euphoric. Um, and naturally, it was a little bit disappointing arriving into, especially in the 40s, in 48, 49, after Israel was founded. They were placed in camps, very dire conditions. Um, 10,000 people in living in tents with no proper sewage, with like food that they didn't know, was very cold in that winter, in that particular winter in Israel when they arrived. It was very cold, and the camps flooded. Um, yeah, it was like I compare it in the book to, like pining over someone for many, many years, and then like the reality is kind of a slap in the face. Um,
But then there was a role for songs.
so songs were a big, big part of Yemeni Jewish lives forever. Both men and women. The singing was a big part. Music was a big part of their lives. But for the women specifically, because they were illiterate and because they were not allowed to pray, they didn't know Hebrew. The men sang Hebrew and their songs were devotional. Like I mentioned, songs about God, songs about Zion, songs about return, and so on. But the women who, communicated in Arabic, in the language of the place, sang songs about heartache and betrayal and jealousy and, like, yeah, uh, very sad songs because their lives were hard. Everyone's lives were hard, but the women more so because they were oppressed. Um, they didn't really have a voice. Like I said, they were not allowed to pray. They were not allowed to go to school. Their lives were just around each other, and they were subject to authority of men. If it wasn't your husband and it was your father and your brother, to the point that they had to walk a few steps behind the man if they walked in the market. Um, it was just, they married very young, like children, at times. So this was their way, this was their outlet, this was how they told their stories, this was how they expressed themselves in a culture that said that their voices didn't really matter. There was I have that line in the book. There was an Israeli Yemeni poet, Bracha Seri, who once said that there was no greater insult for a Yemeni woman than to be considered unquiet.
Unquiet.
Unquiet. That's right. So that was their voice. This was how they spoke, you know, and told what's in their heart, and how they felt, you know.
And then
Um,
what's the connection to the later visit? I presume to you.
yeah, so maybe I'll tell you first how I found out about the songs. When I was doing research about um, Jewish Yemeni lives, which I've done so much of it. And the first one that I was fortunate to get, sorry, I'll just quiet my phone. I was fortunate to get a grant from the Chalmers Foundation in Ontario Arts Council that allowed me to go to Israel and just speak with elderly women And I sat with them and we talked, and they told me stories. And then at some point or another, they would start singing. And I was like, okay, I always knew of those songs. I heard them at weddings and things like that, but I didn't understand them because they were in a language that I didn't really speak. So I started looking into that. And one day I came across one of the women I interviewed was Gila Bishari, who was a singer, and she was adapting both traditions, both the male, more, like I said, liturgic kind of songs, and the men and the women's songs, which were in Arabic. And she told me all about it, and I was fascinated. Um, and then I remember as I drove away from her that day, I thought to myself, no, you need to sing. You need to learn to sing these songs. You're a descendant of these women. You're a Jewish Yemeni woman. It's not enough that I would learn about them theoretically right now. I need to actually take part in this tradition. So I came back and I started taking lessons. And then I realized it also had to be a part of a bigger part, I guess, of the novel. And I included the songs in the novel. Yeah, as a way for the mom, who's, it's not a spoiler, she's dead in the first few pages of the book. It was kind of a way to hear her voice, a woman of that generation, a woman who was kind of voiceless. That was the way to give Saida, the mother, voice through these songs that she wrote.
What do you want the reader to gather, to go away from your book with?
I think the main thing when I always think about what do I want to get from anything I write, my biggest motivation in writing is to evoke emotions. Like when I think of how I used to read as a child, I used to love just feeling, and crying and laughing and longing and all of this. And I feel like sometimes maybe we lose some of that in in the name of being clever, or in the name of, like, I don't know, being sparse, or whatever is the literary trend at the time. And I want readers to feel. I want them to feel deeply. It's also what I want from books myself as a reader. So that would be the bigger answer for that. Um,
I I spoke with someone who said that the best way to strengthen and expose oneself to empathy is by reading fiction, because
that's
through books, and particularly books, not movies or whatnot, but books
that's
where you
right.
had to read and then imagine in your mind what was actually going on, um, you grew empathy because you lived in other people's lives for a couple hundred pages.
That's right. That's right. And I love that quote, and I've always felt it really in my bones. And to me too is like, I think, thinking about Israel, it's this country that is always on the news. And what you see is just like, very distant, obviously. And any country, any place that I read about, what novels do is they give you like this focused gaze on that one home, and one voice. And we really get to experience it so much more closely. And yes, it does make the other seem less other, and it does make us, have more empathy for sure. For me personally, I feel like writing fiction also does that. Because in writing fiction, I didn't just want to write characters that are like me. It was also important for me to find characters that are different than me, characters who have different maybe beliefs. One of my characters, became radicalized during the peace talks. It was really important that I don't have to agree with them, but I wanted to be able to understand
That's
where
interesting
he
that
came
you want to
from.
write about different people. You must really have
Hmm.
to do a fair amount of research and thinking
Yeah.
before you write about other people and their different ideals.
Hmm. Yeah, I did. And I gave it to people that I know that were more in line with this character's beliefs, and opinions. And I gave it to them to read as well, to make sure that I got it right. But in the name again of nuance, which is something I think we're lacking these days. It was important that I do that research and try to complicate a little bit that story. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I know there's another reason why, but we're going to have to take a break. So we're going to have to leave
Okay.
everyone in anticipation of finding out what the other reason or reasons were that you wrote the book and wanted people to take from it. We're going to have to take a message break. We're going to be back in just 2 minutes with Ayelet Tsabari, who is an author of a wonderful book. Remind us all of the name of the book and where one can get it, please.
Songs for the Brokenhearted was published by HarperCollins, and you can find it in any bookstore.
Song for the Brokenhearted. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes.
Hello.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm having a really interesting conversation with Ayelet Tsabari. She is an author of a new memoir it's not a new memoir, it's a new novel called Songs for the Brokenhearted. And I think it's a really interesting story that we've been hearing about a young Yemeni Israeli woman who learns of her mother's secret romance in a dramatic journey through lost family stories. Lots of us probably have them, revealing the unbreakable bond between a mother and a daughter in the debut novel of an award-winning literary voice. Ayelet Tsabari is the author of a memoir and essays called The Art of Leaving, winner of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. She's a finalist or has been a finalist for the Hillary Weston, Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction and the Vine Awards for Canadian Jewish Literature, and an Apple Books and Caracas Review Best Book of 2019. She co-edited the anthology Tongues on Longing and Belonging Through Language. The very first book, The Best Place on Earth, won one award for Jewish literature and the award for Jewish fiction, and the book was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. You're a graduate of Simon Fraser University's Writer Studio and the program in creative writing at the University of Guelph, and you teach in the Masters of Finance program at the University of Guelph, and also at the University of King's College in creative nonfiction. Quite a background. How'd you get into writing?
I always say it just came built in my case. Like I started writing when I was 6. Like before that, I used to do comics because I couldn't write because I didn't have the alphabet. So I always told stories, and I always knew that's what I wanted to do. Took a long and convoluted way to get there, but it really was something that, yeah, my biggest, passion as a kid and as a teen. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a Master's of Fine Arts. That's why did you do academic in writing as well?
So when you think about creative writing, like a Master of Fine Arts is not as academic as other fields. It's actually, very much craft based, and your thesis is a book, like you're writing. My thesis was my first book, the Best Place on Earth. I wrote it during that program. So yeah, there's a lot of reading and there's a lot of discussion, but it's not. I didn't feel like it was an academic thing. It was just a way to kind of professionalize, I guess, and find community and find mentorship in the literary world in Canada. Mm-hmm.
I read a book where the main character was, I think, Zahara, and I loved it. And your main character is Zahara. And so
That's right.
As soon as I saw that, I was extremely intrigued because it's not a name one, at least I don't see all the time. And Zahara was living in New York City, and well, you tell me, she was living in New York City and really had complicated views of Israel, I understand, and wished that her skin was lighter and her mother's music was quieter. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so I think obviously, I mean, it's just something that we do, I think, often. And she says that in the book too, that as we grow, especially, I guess, daughters, but maybe sons too, and I just don't know because I'm not a son. We kind of want to distance ourselves a little bit from, our mothers. But in Zahara's case, and a lot of, I would say, Yemeni who grew up in Israel, there was a sense that there was, like, again, back to voice, our voices weren't really being heard. It felt like, for me growing up, what I saw on the news, sorry, not on the news, but on books and the media, as far as representation, there wasn't much of it. It was very Ashkenazi, very European. Like I grew up wishing that I was blonde and blue-eyed, right? Because this is what they kind of marketed for me as the desired look in a country of 50%, Middle Eastern. It makes no sense, but that's how it was. So I think for her, it was just a way to become different, to push away, her history, her heritage, just to become, what she thought was better. And it's a really sad story. And like I said, I think it's a common story on one hand, but specifically, I would say that Jews of Middle Eastern descent in Israel have felt it more strongly than Jews of European descent, which, was considered, I'm careful in my words, but it was considered the desired, way to be, the identity, to be Israeli, it was Ashkenazi, Israeliness felt at the time more Ashkenazi. I would say it's changing nowadays, but that's how it felt at the time. And yeah.
Zahara finds she goes to Israel without a return ticket after her mother's passing, and finds herself in an unexpected path that leads to a shocking truth about her family, including dangers that lurk for impressionable young men and secrets that force her to question everything she thought she knew about her parents, her heritage, and her own future. It's a story about voice and voicelessness.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about her arrival in Israel.
So, like I mentioned before, it's not a spoiler that Saida, Zahara's mom, passes away in the beginning of the novel. So she returns because she has to return for the funeral. But already, I think her life was, falling kind of apart in New York. So when she's coming, she doesn't really have anything holding her back. Because they were so distant, Zahara, I think, felt like her mom's life was small, you know? Um, and again, I mentioned before what the Yemeni women's lives were like. They were not allowed to do a lot of things. They had to be in the house. They don't work. They don't study. They were illiterate. And trying to push away from this, she saw her mom. She saw her mom's life as a small life. And then she suddenly finds out in her estate, she finds out those tapes where her mom is singing in Arabic songs that she cannot understand, and she takes them to people who do understand, and they tell them that these are love songs. And she finds out that her mom was a creative person. She finds out that her mom was, maybe in love with someone else once. She finds out the richness of her mom's life that she never knew, right? And at the same time, because she spent so much time at home after being away for so long, she starts to reconnect with her heritage, with her background, with the neighborhood, with the people, with her family, after being distant from it for such a long time.
What are the
Which is something I
dangers?
can relate to as well. Yeah.
What are the dangers that lurk for impressionable young men?
Yeah. So remember I mentioned before that I was trying to write characters that I don't necessarily agree with, or that they have very different views on, say, politics. One of the main characters in the novel, I mentioned Saida and I mentioned Zahara, but there's also Yoni, and Yoni is Zahara's nephew, and he was practically raised by his grandma. He was very, very close to her, and her passing away, her death, really, just shakes him. And this is a time when things in Israel were very precarious, you know. On one hand, it was the peace process, and a lot of us were so hopeful and so happy. But there were people out there who were not happy with it. People who thought that, you know, this is the dream of the greater Eretz Israel is now gone. We're giving away too much, you know. And on the third hand, there were the Palestinians. Some of them were also ecstatic, and some of them were also worried that, you know, the Palestinians were giving away too much or not getting enough really from this process. So, you know, for me growing up, it was such a dream. It was such a hopeful time, but I knew that it wasn't like that for everyone, because obviously one Israeli right-wing religious fanatic ended up assassinating Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin at that time because of him trying to make peace. So it was clear that there was an entire part of you know, this country that I didn't really understand, and I wanted to. So I made Yoni. I didn't make him. He just showed up one day and decided that this is what's happening. But he's being radicalized because he's in a sensitive time and he's in a fragile time in his life, and he's a young man, and he's angry because his grandma just died, and he's angry for other reasons because he's a teenager. And it suddenly gave him kind of an outlet, the demonstrations, and, you know, starting to believe in what older men told him about what's happening in the country, and kind of going in a wrong path, you know, toward, just radicalizing. This was a tough thing for me to write, but it was important for me to write it because I wanted, again, the nuance. I wanted the whole picture. I didn't just want to write someone who's like me. It's also too easy, not as fun. It's fun, you know what I mean? Like, I want the challenge. Yeah.
This sounds like just a fascinating book. Can you read something from the book for us, please?
Sure. So what should I read? I was going to read from the beginning, but now I'm wondering if I should read something about Yoni, if
No,
I
read
find
something
it.
about the daughter.
All right. So I'm going to read the beginning of Zahara, and yeah, from chapter 1. It was my sister Lizzie who told me. Her voice transmitted through telephone lines that ran underneath seas and borders from Sha'aria, our Yemeni neighborhood at the edge of a suburb east of Tel Aviv, to this guest house counter in the Thai island of Kopangan, echoed faintly. Zohara, she said. Not Zolki, I noted. You have to come home. You have to come home, a teeny version of her repeated. What happened? I said, but I already knew. I'd known as soon as I opened the bungalow door to find the guest house attendant, eyes shifting as he told me the Israeli embassy in Bangkok was looking for me. Zohara Haddad, said the man on the other line without fanfare. Yuval from the embassy, I'm putting your sister on the line. Lizzie told me, and then told me again, that our mother was dead, that she'd collapsed in her kitchen while cleaning. I pictured an overturned bucket of a diluted bleach solution. Remembered how I used to joke, a joke, that I wished someone would love me as much as my mom loved bleach. That her heart just stopped. That she died instantly, painlessly. But how did they know, really? My mind was slow to process the information, but my body reacted immediately, as though it recognized the loss in its bones, the final cut, the last stage of separation between us. I heard myself gasp, felt my hand pressing over my mouth as if to stop the sounds from coming. With my other hand, I clutched the edge of the counter to steady myself. I felt hollowed out, as though my insides had been sucked out of my body, and the shell might crumble to the ground like a heap of empty clothes. In the cavity that gaped, something dropped and crashed. I guess I'll stop here.
Why did you leave Israel? Or I don't know your story. And why did Zahara leave Israel?
Yeah, so there's always like the small question. I left because, I met a guy while I was traveling and he was Canadian and I followed him and all of this. But when I think of the bigger picture, and I think that's also why the book is set in the 1995 during the Oslo Accord and the assassination. I was actually traveling when I found out that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. And I mentioned it was such a hopeful time, and it was followed by such heartbreak, and I think it's kind of the hugest fork in the road in our history. And I can see how it connects us to today easily, and I feel like maybe if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have left, so I feel like something happened in that day. There was a fracture that made it easier for me to leave, to just pick up and go. Less reasons to stay, I guess, even if I didn't at the time know that. This is me looking in retrospect as someone who's also a memorist, you know what I mean? So kind of thinking in those terms. With Zohara, I didn't mention a part of her story that I think is relevant. It's not only that she, it's not only that she left to New York. Before that, even, she was sent to a very fancy boarding school on scholarship that integrated, Ashkenazi rich children with kids, boarders, they call them, who came from impoverished neighborhoods, mostly Mizrahi, which is Jews that came from Middle Eastern and North African descent. And this is where she kind of learned or internalized kind of that internal racism toward herself, and felt like she needed to be something else, that she needed to be more educated than her parents, that she needed to do better, that she needed to listen to that kind of music and not that kind of music, not the kind of Arabic music, but more, whatever, European music. And so that kind of put her in that trajectory that I think sent her away eventually, to have a better life, to have a different life than what was available for someone like her mom.
What a fascinating story. We're going to have to take a break, though, and come back. And I'm going to ask you what the other reason why you wrote the book and what you hope that people get out of it. Empathy was one, but I think the other one was something about voice. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Ayelet Tsabari is with us tonight. She is an author of a book called Songs for the Brokenhearted. It sounds like just a fascinating story about a young lady who travels back to Israel to find out about her mother's hidden story and learns a lot about herself and her mother and about life. And Ayelet, you told us that one of the reasons why you wrote the book and that you wanted the reader to get was empathy. What was the other reason?
I mentioned before that I grew up, not really reading and not seeing myself in literature, not seeing myself in books. I think about Toni Morrison's famous quote about write the book you want to read. So I really wanted to celebrate, the Jewish community, the Jewish Yemeni community, whose stories were, really not seen in literature. But more specifically, I wanted to give voice or to amplify the voices and the stories of Jewish Yemeni women who were, so silenced for so long. And what better way to do this than through their songs, which was their way of telling their stories, which was their way of making themselves heard. So yeah, it's to honor these women my family, my mom, my grandmother, my amazing aunts. And this is also why I dedicated the book to the women of my family.
Zahara,
Mhm.
the character, finds out something about her mother's background. Did you find something out about your mother or grandmother's background?
I think as I grew older, I found a lot of different things about them. One of the interesting thing I found out, I'm just going to leave it here, and then you're going to have to read the book to find out why it's important for this book. But I found out, for example, that my grandmother was a second wife to my grandfather. And I found that much later in life because it wasn't something people talked about, right? Maybe they were embarrassed by it because obviously that was frowned upon in Israel. Um, but yeah, and I found out that she got out of it and she ended up with my grandfather. She said it's me or him, me or her, and he chose her. And I just think what a bold and feminist kind of move it was on her part. I found it really inspiring, like even within the confines, she was able of that, you know, being oppressed in this culture, she was able to stand up for herself.
You mentioned that the peace accords, a couple decades ago were quite a hopeful time in Israeli history. How do you feel now?
Ah, um, heavy sigh. Um, I'm working hard on being active in things that give me hope, and it's not easy. Um, but I'm trying. I find, the organizations and the people that give me a semblance of hope, and I really, really hold on hard uh, to that. It's not. It's not easy.
Why? Why is it not easy?
Because it feels very polarized right now. Um, and yeah, it feels dark. It feels like a very dark time right now.
The whole
Um,
world seems polarized. What's going on?
I know. And that's the third thing that I didn't mention, but it's the nuance. It's wanting to offer nuance and offer complications and make people maybe just see different facets of something they are so sure they know. Um, and maybe it will, and it's not, that's also not easy. People don't want nuance right now. So even by offering that, I feel like some people are balking against that a little bit, right? um, because it's easier when it's like this and like that, and it's black and white and good and bad, and it's just, but I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in that simple story.
I think many people didn't realize that there was, either racism or what you called, I think it was internal racism or something like that between
Mm-hmm.
European Jews and them from others from the Middle East. Tell me, is there a lesson there?
Um, this too is a way to complicate a story and a complicated narrative for me, and to show that it's not, it's layered. And Israel as a society is it's diverse, you know. There's also like Druze. There's also 20% of Israeli citizens who are Arabs, Muslims, and Christians. There's Ethiopian Jews and there's Moroccan Jews and they're Iraqi and all kinds. Um, so yeah, it's really important to show that kind of diversity of Israeli experience, of Jewish experience. Um, Again, people think they know. And I'm hoping that through this book, they might be introduced to more, or to something just different.
Sounds wonderful. Tell us again the name of the book and where we can get it, please.
So, Songs for the Brokenhearted, published by HarperCollins and available in your favorite bookstore near you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a
It was
break and come
great.
back with some of my own thoughts on this topic in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.